You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Brandon Violette. He is the head writer for RoboGobo and Pupstruction at Disney Television Animation and the co-creator and head writer of CoComelon Lane. I have kids that are older, so, if you talked about like the Backyardigans and a bunch of other old shows, then we knew all those, but these are all new. I'm sure they're good like old ones. And we're going to talk about the mechanics of storytelling. So I think this should be a pretty cool call. So welcome, Brandon.
Richard, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Excellent. Well, tell me about how did you get into the areas you're at to write for these shows? And I'm sure a lot goes into them. Let's just start with your background a little bit. Like, where'd you come from?
Yeah. So I grew up kind of in the suburbs of Los Angeles, and the seeds of storytelling were kind of there from the beginning. Like I was a 90s Nickelodeon kid. So I remember just falling in love with Rocko's Modern Life and specifically the making of featurettes that they would show in between the commercials. And that was my first, just this insight into those are the people making this show I love. And literally I was just in elementary school at the time. And ever since that moment, I was just obsessed with storytelling. And first it was like being a cartoonist. So I was always drawing. And then in high school, I kind of realized I was a lousy, mediocre artist at best. And I started to get into filmmaking in college and community college and really got my first foot in the door at Hasbro Studios, which, they do live action movies, they do Transformers and G.I. Joe, and they have tons of brands. And they were launching an animated show called Stretch Armstrong with Netflix. It was an animated 6 to 11 show, and they were looking for a PA or a writer's assistant. And I was there at the studio and I put my name in and got the job. And that was my first foray into animation.
Oh, it's really cool. Yeah, I remember watching my kids watch Dora when they were real little and they would talk back to the screen. And I was like, oh, wow, this is a new involvement device that it's not the storytelling itself, I guess, but it's, I don't know how you guys call it an involvement device. We use various things that, I know, with Sesame Street, they tested having just puppets and then just people. And when they had both together, kids paid more attention. And I know that's more the mechanics of how it's delivered, but then there's the storytelling itself. But I think I'm sure a lot goes into it. I don't know what, but.
You mentioned CoComelon Lane, and that was something that we did on that show was breaking the fourth wall, that you alluded to, where the character is talking to the screen. And for really young kids, that's an important part of engagement, is having someone talk to you. And usually that's kind of paired with a curriculum-based show where you're trying to teach the kids something or impart some takeaway that they could use, naming an emotion or counting or things like that, where it's helpful for really young kids to have that kind of direct engagement.
Yeah, that's really cool. I watched enough of the old shows to hopefully earn the right not to watch the new ones. No offense, because
that's all good. I'm a parent now. We all go through it, right?
Well, the kids, they want to watch them so many times in a row.
Oh, yeah.
I would lay down to sleep and I would hear the songs in my head. And I was like, oh, my God, where I'd be able to sing them. And after a while, you can't help but like them. You've heard them 1,000 times now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm right there right now with our toddler. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what's the funny thing is when your kids get older, they forget. And you'll still like the shows because you were forced to watch them a million times. And then the kids go, oh, these are baby shows. I don't want to watch them. So when Dora came out in the movies, I said, I don't care. Y'all made me watch this. We're going to the movies to see it. I want to see what happens.
Yeah, you're the one pulling them into watching it.
Yeah, but it's cool. It's nice to see some of the good shows instead of the crap ones that are horrible. There was one named The Wonder Pet, and one of the characters had a lisp. And my daughter started lisping, and I was like, we're not letting her watch it ever again. And I couldn't believe whoever created the show put this in there. It's like, what's wrong with them? Why did they, what the heck? The kid, my daughter picked it up. It took like 6 months for her to stop doing it. But these are just some of the memories I have from these shows,
Yeah. There's a lot of like parents, sometimes you hear kids picking up British accents from Peppa Pig.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I did love that. They die rapping on it.
Yeah.
Or they had Team Movie Zoomy for a little while. And one of the characters named Bot had like a bigger stomach. So my son, when I was little, you go, Daddy, you're like Bot. You have a big stomach. I was like, oh, thanks. But getting back to it. So there's storytelling, and then there's storytelling for kids, which is probably like a really high level. What kind of things have to go on in order to make a program successful?
Gosh, well, simplicity is key, and it's really hard to be simple, and it's hard to write for kids because there's a temptation to want to be, and it depends on what kind of kids. Like there's really young preschool, there's 6 to 11, so there's different categories of programming depending on the comprehension level. But generally, you want to be extremely simple and clear. And there's this it's really easy to write above kids' heads. And so the challenge is really trying to get and hone that kid perspective and keep it consistent. Because if you're doing like a TV series and you have an episode a week that you're doing, it's really important to maintain that consistency and that promise that you set up in that initial concept. So that's like the biggest thing that goes into it, is just like earning their attention and then keeping it with simple yet as sophisticated as possible storytelling.
Well, there's also parents watching with the kids. Like I remember Darkwing Duck, they had this ray gun. They called it the Norma Ray. So for adults, it's like, oh, it's Marilyn Monroe's name. They laugh. The kids had no idea. Have you seen where they seed stuff that only adults would know that won't hurt the kids to make the adults involved too?
Yeah, co-parenting or not co-parenting, co-viewing rather is a big deal. And the best shows are the shows that you could watch with your kid. Because as you said earlier, kids are all about repetition and watching the same show over and over. And if you could do something and put a show together that the parents can get something out of and enjoy it, and not just kind of drive them crazy with the same songs or the same kind of thing that they heard before, and to really keep their attention, I think is makes for the best kind of show. But that's hard, and those conversations do happen, and it's difficult. But it's oftentimes it could be in the music. Sometimes music. Something that we tried to do on CoComelon Lane was to elevate the songs and the melodies into something that parents could find themselves singing along to, and not just like being driven crazy by the repetition.
Yeah, some of the music is great. I mean, the themes, and there was a show, Jack's Big Music Show, and they had violin players, they had like a cappella groups, music was really good. I actually would listen to it on my own just because it sounds good. Maybe it sounds silly, but I wonder how much effort goes into all the aspects of these shows. Like how many people write them, how many people choose the music, like what do the consumers of the shows not see? Like how's the sausage made?
Well, so on a typical show, there's a head writer, and you have ideally a writer's room, and that might consist of 4 full-time staff writers and an assistant writer, and then you have a handful of like freelance scripts that you could hire writers for outside of the room. And so let's say you get a green light for 50 episodes, and it's 50 episodes and they're each 11 minutes. So each writer rotates. And so it's like, okay, this week this writer is taking this episode, and this next week the next writer is, and then in that rotation you have opportunities to hire the assistant to give them their shot, who is often an up-and-coming writer themselves, or hire out to a freelance and maybe test a new writer out that you want to see how they could do. And so the writer's room is kind of tight-knit that way, about like on average 5, but a lot of shows also have no writer's room and just a full freelance model, and that is tough, and it's all just dependent on the budget and the studio. But Disney is one of those places where they do have writer's rooms still, which is just it makes all the difference. And so that's really where everything starts, is the writer's room.
Yeah, how do you make sure that all the characters don't come out of character? Like if I come into a show and I know there's already been like 10 episodes done, I'd have to watch them all and study the characters to make sure like I'm writing in line with how the show is and the characters talk, and make it consistent too, so that the kids don't think like, what happened to so-and-so? He's different. No,
that's a great question. And that's exactly the job of the head writer, is to ensure that consistency across every episode. So we like to think the head writer is like quality control. So you have the staff writers that will write, of course, first you break a story together, then you write typically the premise, which is like 1-page summary, and then it goes to the network, you get notes back, go to outline, which is a couple pages longer, and it goes to network, get notes back, and then you go to script. And the head writer is involved at each level, but the job is especially important at script because you'll get something from a staff writer and it can be a great script, but there's things that you have to keep in mind, like consistency of voice that you're talking about, where as the head writer, you have the view of all the episodes that are coming up that you've done before. You go from like big picture to small picture all day. And so that's the job, is to make sure that it feels like the show. It's a standalone episode. It has this story that works on its own, but it also feels a part of every other episode that came before it and will come after it. And that's the job of a head writer.
And do you just do one and you're like, oh, I hope it works? Or do you do multiple shows and test them before they go out to like a test audience?
Yeah. So typically studios will test a handful of early episodes with kids groups. And so they'll literally adapt an outline or a script into what they call a storybook. And that storybook is presented on like poster board, and there's images and really basic text. And you want it's like a 10 to 12 minute storybook reading of the episode. And the kids are obviously read the text and they're shown pictures, and just like a picture book, but it's for testing purposes, and their comprehension is evaluated. And it's like, okay, they seem to lose interest here, or they had a lot of questions about this, or, you set up a birthday party at the beginning, but it didn't really pay off because the kids were wondering where the cake was and so there are insights that you can get from testing that you take with you into the scripting of the episode, the animatic of the episode. And that's typically done at the beginning of a show's creation. And like the second season, they'll kind of batch test episodes just to kind of see where things are at. So that's key.
What have you learned about your own kids' behavior and thought process from doing this stuff?
Oh gosh. So she is almost 3. And so she's at that age where, so first, just how every network note I've ever gotten that says, be careful about this or change this because we don't want to model this kind of behavior. I mean, it comes full circle. I see how influential television and just screens are in general. And so I'm extremely mindful of the stories that we're coming up with and the takeaways. And are we wanting to say that this lesson is a good thing to impart to kids? And I'm much more aware of that co-viewing thing that we talked about is a big deal because it is repetition, and she'll go from one thing to this thing to that, and it's like okay, sometimes it's easy to understand why they like something, and sometimes they get hooked on something and it's like, I don't know what they see in this. And so there's certain things that hold true, like kids love vehicles, and that's a big one. And that's something that comes up a lot because the kids' TV space is driven so much by toys. And that's really what determines whether a show will often get another season is toys. And so that's a big one.
So it's not just viewership, it's actually the merchandising?
No, it's merchandising. That's where the money's made in kids' TV. Yeah. And the reason why preschool television is so huge is because parents are still buying toys for their kids in that preschool kind of age. Something that I was talking to someone in consumer products not too long ago, and they said that there's a trend that's been happening for the last 20 years, which is that kids are stopping playing with toys at a much younger age than they were before because of screens. And so that affects the 6 to 11 shows that aren't getting made, right? Like there's a lot of preschool shows getting made because there's a lot of toy potential, but that kind of mid-level kid type of show, there's less and less that's going into production because there's less franchise potential. And so that's just something alarming. And I don't know what to do about that, but it makes sense. Not saying that it's right, but it makes sense because of just how screens are kind of taking over everything.
Well, I remember there was this toys called Skylanders. They were really smart. So you get the Skylanders, and there was I think a show with it. But in order to access certain parts of the map, you'd have to get these crystals and characters, and you had to buy them. They were physical. They had a little chip in them, and you put it near the game console. Then it activated, this new level you can get to. So instead of spending $30 in the game, it was $300-400 if you want to get everything over time. And I'm like, man, what a route kit these guys, you guys did. I wonder. I mean, I guess they'll have to, but they'll have to tie in to show, and you're watching it with your ability to access access maybe certain parts of a game or get a toy at all. Maybe that's a code word in a show or something to force that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the potential is huge. And that's why you see all the popular shows have corresponding books on the shelf, and there's toys, there's now apps that go along with that. So they are trying to adapt, but it is really down to, it's not just viewership. It's that's where the fan is created, but it's all the other avenues that really count toward a show's, whether or not a show continues.
And it's interesting. I don't know what you do, because I'm imagining 8, 9, 10-year-old, right? They're probably not going to play with just a stuffed animal, because at that age they could just watch something on on their laptop or whatever, or their phone, or their mom's
or video
phone.
games.
Yeah. It's a lot of electronic, and it's less kind of physical. And we've all heard kids spending less time outside, right? And so in that category, it's they're stopping playing with toys at a younger age.
Do you know the average age they used to play with toys, and what's the average age now?
I don't, but just anecdotally, I'm thinking, the 8 or 9-year-old you mentioned, I was still playing with physical toys. I had a diet of video games as well as a kid, but I still played with toys at that age.
Yeah,
and that's the 6 to 11 is the next kind of category of kids television. That's your classic Saturday morning cartoons, and there's just less of that being made now for that very reason.
Well, I see a problem too. There's a lot of I remember my kids watched BoJack Horseman and Chowder, and I don't know, great. They were teenagers, but I'm like, man, this isn't. They shouldn't be watching this stuff even as teenagers. It was really adult themes. And I wonder I wonder if that's a problem too, is how do you prevent kids from seeing the older kid stuff and just seeing things they should not see?
It's harder. I'm not obviously there yet, but it is harder because it's not just one central screen anymore, like the TV in the living room and then the TV in the bedroom, and you can easily just kind of see what's going on. It is harder, and I don't have an answer for that. But it's funny that you mentioned BoJack. That kind of show, that demographic, they're still very popular. So it's really the mid-level show that is not getting made as much, but the older adult shows are very popular, and the very, very, very young shows.
And then the storytelling itself, what did you have to learn? What kind of skills that you didn't have before? How difficult is it what you do? Is it just incredibly high level, you feel, or is it not so bad once you learn the ins and outs?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because every single script is hard. It's never not been difficult, but I think that there's a fun challenge to that. It's hard in an engaging way. One thing that you learn in film school or any writing class, that classic 3-act structure, hero's journey, and that's very much still used in the kids space. I mean, every week we break stories, and it's up on a whiteboard, and it's 3 acts. It's act 1, 2, 3, and then it's A, B, C, D happens in act 1, A, B, C, D in act 2, and act 3. And we're literally putting the main points on the board, and we say things like, okay, this is the low point. Okay, this is the escalation. This is the act break. And so even though it's kids television, it's still the classic storytelling structure.
I spoke to you just very briefly offline about the hero's journey, where boy meets girl, boy leads the girl, the 20, archetype plots. Are you guys using that when you write these stories? All right, we're going to do a hero's journey one. All right, now we're going to switch to, this kind of one, a revenge. Well, you wouldn't do revenge for kids. But,
right.
You know what I mean? Do you step through them?
Yeah, essentially we do. So instead of saying, the revenge, but it's okay, we're going to tell a fear of the dark story, or we're going to tell, it's a classic story about a kid who's afraid to go to the doctor. And so it's dropping it to those kid themes, but then finding the structure within those themes.
Well, yeah, how much does it help that you have probably the same structure or structure of a theme? You're going to write to it. So it limits you, but also maybe it makes it easier. You're like, okay, I know I have 4 sections. I have the up and down each section. So I write formulaically, but within guidelines.
Yeah, I think that the restrictions in, let's say, kids TV are helpful. There's a certain kind of person that sees the restrictions as something to avoid. They don't want to write in kids TV. But I think that if you really want to do great work, that you have to see the restrictions as helpful and to embrace those creative restrictions, because they'll help you think of something that you wouldn't normally have thought of. So if you see them as roadblocks and just things that you can't do, then you're going to try to write older and write clever and write things that just go over kids' heads. And that's not going to help you go very far. The network is going to ding that and it's not going to work. So I think you have to embrace those restrictions and say, okay, we can't do this way, but in this Fear of the Dark story, there's still a structure to it. So how could we make this familiar theme feel fresh? And the 3-act structure, like you're saying, are those guidelines that kind of help you weave a satisfying story together. So it doesn't feel like you're just telling the kid how to feel, but you're showing them a character on kid-friendly adventure. It can still feel high stakes, even if it's a kid's show.
Have you ever been presented with a story that you just didn't want to write because like you didn't agree with what it was trying to convey? Have you ever had that pressure?
I don't think so. I can't recall. There are some stories that seem creatively tougher at first. And I think that part of the job is to find your way to love it. And that's part of your job is to really, I like to think visually, write visually, and to try to find the cinematic moments and to make it feel big, no matter what kind of story it is. And I think that's how a story really reaches its full potential. Because if you don't like the story or there's something that you're not fully getting, it's going to read like that on the page. And so the fun challenge of it is like, okay, no, maybe this isn't something that you would write. Maybe it's something you were assigned by the head writer. So you're like, okay, I got to get my head around this. But that's part of the job. And that's the fun, is to how can you really push the story to reach its full potential and make it feel big and stand alongside the others. I think that's the challenge. That's the fun challenge.
Okay. Do you feel like it's helped you to do other things in your life? Being able to writing these stories over and over and over, like not the same ones, of course, but has your work helped you be better at other things outside of work that were unexpected for you?
Oh gosh, what a question.
I don't know. Maybe you're a good like impromptu storyteller for your daughter at night or something. If she's going to sleep, or if you need to make an excuse up to your wife, you're like, you come up with a good story.
Well, we read like 3 to 4 books a night, and that's something that I really want to transfer that love to my daughter. I think where it can help, and there's skills that you get in the writer's room because you learn how to deal with people, and you learn how to build on other people's half ideas, because you're not going to have all the ideas. And of course, not everything you say is going to be perfect, but you learn how to help stir the pot. And so you say like, okay, maybe it's something like this, and then someone else builds on it, and then you build on what they say. And then out of that comes an insight or comes an idea for a scene where it all comes together. And then that goes on the board. And so it's like volleyball, where not everyone has to score, but like everyone is helping keep the ball in the air. And eventually someone is going to hit that idea and go, oh, this is what it should be. And then it goes on the board. And so you're all kind of supporting each other. And I call it like stirring the pot. And so you learn that, and also confidence to be wrong. And there's not that, oh gosh, I'm going to say something stupid and get fired, and they're going to wonder, why did I open my mouth? It's like, no, confidence to just throw out something to help someone else think of something, not that you have to nail it every time you open your mouth. And so I think that's a big takeaway, because you can kind of use that in other areas of life.
Is your daughter at the point where she makes up stories and tells you, you stories, or do you ever play a game like that where like, tell me a story or something?
Gosh, so she's in the past couple months, I've really seen her imagination develop. And so she's giving voices to stuffed animals, and she's role playing with her stuffed animals, and she's playing games with them, and that have these, she wants to cook for them, or she wants to build a house out of these little magnet tiles that we have. Or so I see her imagination kind of just coming alive. That's been this like just amazing thing to watch. It's like is just her development, and she's playing with things and saying, this is the house, or this is a piece of chocolate, and it's obviously not. And so she's imagining that it is, and playing with her stuff down, and it's like, wow, it's so wild to see that.
No, that's really cool. Very cool. So I don't know, do you any advice for parents in terms of like what letting their kids watch, what to let their kids watch, what not, how long to watch, anything you learned from what you're doing? Maybe you don't feel like you're in a position to give it, I don't know, but anything you learned that you think would be helpful?
Yeah, that's I think that's something I'm actively navigating now as a parent, because now my wife and I are dealing with requests from our daughter of, she wants to watch a show. And so it's like, okay, do we let her? Do we not? And so of course, on any given day, it could be hard to keep track of like screen time. And so I think the advice is the biggest thing is like how we end the day with that wind down time and make sure she's not too spun up by any shows, because there's a lot of her taste and her preferences also jump around. And so it's something that like, let's not watch anything close to bed and instead wind down with books or things like that. But in terms of like advice on what to watch, gosh, yeah. I leave it up to the parents, but one thing is like how much of a sponge these kids are, and they will repeat whatever they watch on TV. So it's like, it has to be vetted by the parents first.
It'll be cool if does she know you write to these shows?
Not really.
Sean was, if you tell her like you come up with some of the stories, or like, let's say she has a name for one of her stuffed animals, I don't know, Fred or whatever. And you say, you tell her that you write some of these stories, and you say, pretty soon there's going to be a character named Fred, just like yours. You don't tell work, but you insert it into the story. It's harmless, and then you watch the show with her. She sees that she might be amazed,
Yeah, it's funny. There was a character in a Disney show, and we named her Little Esme because her name is Esmeralda, and we call her Esme for short. And I put it on the TV, and I said, "Hey, watch this." But she was too young, so when she heard her name, she kind of looked at the screen and then just kind of looked away. And it was like, oh, okay, that's not the reaction I was anticipating. But as she's getting older and just retaining more and being able to watch more sophisticated storylines, that is a dream that I have, is to create a show that is inspired by my daughter. And something too, we talked about imagination, is how we have this little book that we read about different things that she can be when she grows up. And she said that she wants to be a ballerina, and then another day she wants to be a garbage truck when she grows up. And I just love that. And I love that imagination. And so just trying to capture that kid speak and that kid imagination, I think would be is the pursuit. And just for me personally, like on what you're saying, is just to create a show directly inspired by her would be just such an amazing thing.
It's cool. Probably no, but does anyone do dad jokes go over okay in kid shows, or nobody wants them?
It depends on the show. The world of the show determines, the network, of course, determines. Certain networks are more lenient than others, depending, but really the show itself. So something like Bluey, I think, could get away with more winks at the adults because it's a very simple setup and it's a very simple family dynamic, and whereas a superhero show aimed at preschoolers is already asking for a lot because there's going to be a lot of moving parts on screen, and so maybe the dad jokes or certain things won't fly with the studio because they're already worried about kids' comprehension. So let's just at least keep the language, not overly clever and more accessible to kids. So it depends on the concept and the world of the show and how lenient the network is, or that particular executive.
Right. I was just wondering. My goal is to make my kids go dad every day in their lives. So,
wait, we never stop trying is the key. You could,
Yeah. All dads have to practice them. It's a rule.
That's right.
Right. Well, very good. So where can people, besides watching the shows, I don't know, find out more about you and your work and, and Disney and all that stuff? Where can they go?
Yeah, I host a podcast called Story Series Podcast. It's all about writing and it's, you can find it on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, storyseriespodcast.com. You could have all the links, and that's also connected to my personal website. So that would be a place for people to go.
So very good. Well, it's been good talking to you, and I appreciate you coming, Brandon. Thank you very much.
Richard, this is such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.